150 people in one building, and then versus the decentralized 50 units across the city. I think the decentralized model, you have to be way more intentional about the community, right? Because what you're dealing with is, you can't have a gym or a shared space within a building that you have as a communal space that everyone can share, right? It'll be interesting to see, I guess, kind of how the whole 2020 as a year, which has been wild, how the whole pandemic and the whole scenario we're going through right now kind of affects the different models. But I think you're exactly right. And one of the interesting things, looking at the kind of the master lease versus the revenue share, right? It's a really hot topic, I think, right now in co-living. And it certainly makes sense, right? So if these decentralized players are looking at master lease and they just say, hey, we're gonna fill this up and then pay you as the landlord, the lower retention rates really starts to hit you pretty hard. So we'll see. I personally am a fan of the kind of centralized model, I think, just because you are able to have that community housed within one building. And then I think as well, I actually just wrote an article on community versus scalability, where if you're able to have a larger building, whether it's 150 or I think Star City has a place in San Jose that's going to be 800 units, which are 800 beds, which is wild. But then you really start to see the economies of scale come into play, right? Where you might not be able to get that advantage if you're just renting out units kind of all across the city. So obviously lots to talk about, but I think the kind of the centralized model, it might be easier to create that community feel, which I'm a huge fan of.
Awesome. I know, Connor, we do have, I've known you for a little while now, and I'm like, oh my God, I haven't brought Connor on the show yet. What am I thinking? Again, just such an amazing, somebody that's deep in studying co-living, and just really, it's cool to bring you guys on the show every once in a while too, right? Because you have this amazing perspective about everything. So, I know you told me some of your favorite brands already, but like, who do you think's really nailing the community piece that you've seen?
Yeah. So I think in order to talk about some of the community pieces, I think you kind of have to split the industry a little bit again. So I think there's what I will call like interest-based co-living, right? So if we're thinking about Kndrd quarters, or we're thinking about other kind of smaller co-living players that say, hey, we're all about startup founders living together. We're all about creatives living together. So I think the smaller interest-based co-living, one of them is Living Q. I think they have some spots in San Diego. Yeah. So I was actually able to visit one of their first locations last year.
Christine here with the Co-Living Coach Show, also the founder of Kndrd. Before we launch in, I want to also give a quick thank you. We are happy to bring this episode in partnership with Anyplace. With the ever-growing demand for flexible living, it's more valuable than ever to find move-in ready housing that fits your needs and without the burden of long lease. Serviced apartments and alternative options like co-living make it super easy and painless to move, relocate, or simply explore a city. And we're honored to share with you the best platform to discover unique and affordable places to live in around the world. And we just brought on another partner for the Co-Living Code Show. It is ISL Furnishings, a brand created through Interspace Living. They exist in the exciting space where design meets function. And Interspace parlayed its success in commercial grade unit furniture and conceived an elevated offering. They strongly believe in the co-living industry, and they already work with some of the larger brands like Quarters and Star City. ISL Furnishings was founded with a mission to bring your brand to life. Their goal is to revolutionize the unit furniture experience. Every venue has its own voice. They exist to clarify that voice, interpret your brand vision, and deliver superior quality on time, every time. Their website link is in the show notes. Definitely check that out. So this week we're bringing on Connor. He is a recent MBA grad who wholeheartedly believes in the potential of co-living to facilitate meaningful human connections and positively change the way humans live in the 21st century. While in business school in Malaysia, Connor had the opportunity to visit dozens of co-living operators across the US, Southeast Asia, to research and write about the future of communal living. After finishing his MBA, Connor joined the Co-Liv exec team as head of content and is eager to launch a career to empower the global co-living movement. And he also has a website, ColivingCorner. He has incredible articles that he's already written. He has amazing ones coming up. Just an awesome, awesome person that's extremely passionate and excited. And it really shines through in his energy on this interview. And I've known Connor for a while now, so I was so excited to finally bring on another person that's actually more on the academic side of co-living and is just deep in that realm. Again, we bring on investors, we bring on operators, we bring on all sorts of fun people onto the Co-Living Coach Show. Anybody that is passionate about co-living and helping move this movement forward. And I really appreciate everybody being so willing to come on. And I know you guys are really going to love this episode. And separately, let me say right now, so he's from the States and he's back in the States now. And Connor is, which we talk about on the show, he is looking for the perfect career in co-living. Definitely feel free to get a hold of him. He would be a perfect addition to any team. I can vouch for him. So let's launch right into this week's episode. And one last thing, now that we have sponsors, which we're very grateful for, we've definitely stepped up the audio quality and production. So I would love to hear your guys' feedback if the audio sounds better, especially for all of those listening through podcasts versus YouTube. And that's why we're using the dorky cords as usual. We all want to use our AirPods, even my guests. But of course, the audio is not as great through Bluetooth. So we use the wire headsets. We're using different production way of editing and would love to hear if you guys notice any difference. Okay, so we are bringing on Connor Moore. Really excited. He is so passionate and really deep into co-living sector as an industry. It's definitely a passion of his. I know you just graduated this year, have your MBA now from the Asia School of Business, which is a collaboration with MIT. I would love for you to talk about that first, other than going to Duke University. So actually, let's start there. So welcome to the show, Connor.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. I've been a big fan of the Co-Living Code Show for quite some time now, so honored to be on board.
Yay, awesome. So yeah, we'll back up. So just how did you get into studying co-living and just becoming so passionate? I know you have your site, which we'll put the link at the bottom, which is ColivingCorner, and you write these incredible articles about the industry and the growth. So yeah, let's back up to the very beginning on how you got into this industry.
Sure, yeah. Like you mentioned, yeah, so I went to Duke University for my undergrad. I studied a lot of social entrepreneurship, and my major was in public policy. So a lot of the classes that we were looking at is kind of looking at societal issues, and then how can you build, kind of a solution to some of those societal issues through a market-based approach, right? So that was kind of my background coming out of school. And then after I graduated, I actually spent a year living and working abroad. I lived in Australia, New Zealand, Thailand, which was an absolute blast. And that's what really got me into communal living because I was living in a bunch of different houses. Some I would really describe now as kind of long-term hostels. And once I was kind of like, this is a fantastic way to live, I started doing a bit of research and I found out this is a thing. It's called co-living. So that's kind of how I got into it. And then for 2 years, I spent in a program called Venture for America. So it's an entrepreneurship fellowship program where you spend 2 years working for a startup in the US. I was working for a technology company out of Pittsburgh. And so that really kind of showed me how startups work and working in small teams. And then after that, I went to the Asia School of Business over in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, which was a ton of fun getting to travel around Southeast Asia. And that's really when I dove into the co-living scene. During the summer in between my first and second year, I actually had the chance to spend 3 months visiting co-living places around the world. The school gave me a research grant to go and do that. So huge shout out to the Asia School of Business. And then after that summer, being exposed to so many co-living founders and residents and really the entire industry ecosystem, I thought this is the industry that I want to be involved in long term. So after that, like you mentioned, I launched my website and blog, ColivingCorner. And I've been reading books and chatting with people in the industry ever since. And I'm very, very all about co-living.
I love that. And then where are you? So you're back in the States right now, right? Which city are you in?
Yes. So in Knoxville, Tennessee, which is where I'm originally from.
Awesome. Good stuff. So you got a lot of traveling done, at least now that we're not traveling in 2020 right now. So that's cool. And then when you visited all these other concepts, I would love to hear what are some of your top 3 favorites in the world, whether you visited them or not. What are some concepts you really like what they're doing?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the coolest thing of being able to go to kind of see concepts in Asia, speak with tons and tons of operators out of Europe. One of the organizations that I'm working with now is called Co-Liv, and they're a nonprofit based out of Europe, but it's really becoming global. But so I've got to meet people from France and Spain and really in Germany, UK, all over Europe, which has been great. And then obviously in the US, right? But co-living is being executed, I think, in a very different way across a lot of these, different markets, different continents. So I think in Southeast Asia, a few of my favorites. One is called Hamlet, which I'm sure a lot of folks know. I actually had the chance to visit some of their places in Singapore, and they just seem like an awesome, awesome operator. They have a lot of great community folks on their team that I've had the chance to speak with. And then another one is called Home, HOM. It's just getting started out of KL. The founders there, Brian and Felix, are awesome, awesome guys. And they're really just getting started now. But all of their marketing material that's coming out, the conversations that I've had with them, it seems like they are really on the up. So excited to see how they expand in Malaysia and then across Southeast Asia. And then I guess here in the US, big fan of Star City. I know a lot of folks at Ollie. They have great concepts. Another one's called Alcove Co-Living. It's out of North Carolina. Actually started by some fellow Duke grads. Go Blue Devils. But they've started kind of what they have as a decentralized model. So kind of like bungalow. But they're really hoping to expand across cities in the Southeast, and it'll be interesting to see where they go as well.
And then this, the bungalow model, these models, have you kind of seen any shift? And maybe I'll comment on this after you say or speak on it, in kind of how that model still working, and it's, it was kind of like a rent arbitrage situation is what they're doing, which works great when there's like no vacancies. But when people flee those big cities during a pandemic, then it becomes a little bit of an issue because they didn't really build the community with it, right? It was just like kind of all these units spread out all over the place. What are your thoughts on that? Or what have you seen?
Sure. Yeah. So I think kind of looking at the kind of centralized co-living model, which is the 50 to 150 people in one building, and then versus the decentralized 50 units across a city. I think the decentralized model, you have to be way more intentional about the community, right? Because what you're dealing with is you can't have a gym or a shared space within a building that you have as a communal space that everyone can share, right? It'll be interesting to see, I guess, kind of how the whole 2020 as a year, which has been wild, how the whole pandemic and the whole scenario we're going through right now kind of affects the different models. But I think you're exactly right. And one of the interesting things, looking at the kind of the master lease versus the revenue share, right? It's a really hot topic, I think, right now in co-living. And it certainly makes sense, right? So if these decentralized players are looking at master lease and they just say, hey, we're gonna fill this up and then pay you as the landlord, the lower retention rates really start to hit you pretty hard. So we'll see. I personally am a fan of the kind of centralized model. I think just because you are able to have that community housed within one building. And then I think as well, I actually just wrote an article on community versus scalability, where if you're able to have a larger building, whether it's 150 or I think Star City has a place in San Jose that's going to be 800 units, which are 800 beds, which is wild. But then you really start to see the economies of scale come into play, right? Where you might not be able to get that advantage if you're just renting out units kind of all across the city. So obviously lots to talk about, but I think the kind of the centralized model, it might be easier to create that community feel, which I'm a huge fan of.
Awesome. I know, Connor, we do have, I've known you for a little while now, and I'm like, oh my God, I haven't brought Connor on the show yet. What am I thinking? Again, just such an amazing, somebody that's deep in studying co-living and just really, it's cool to bring you guys on the show every once in a while too, right? Because you have this amazing perspective about everything. So, I know you told me some of your favorite brands already, but like, who do you think is really nailing the community piece that you've seen?
Yeah. So I think in order to talk about some of the community pieces, I think you kind of have to split the industry a little bit again. So I think there's what I will call like interest-based co-living, right? So if we're thinking about Kndrd quarters, or we're thinking about other kind of smaller co-living players that say, hey, we're all about startup founders living together. We're all about creatives living together. So I think the smaller interest-based co-living, one of them is Living Q. I think they have some spots in
San
in
Diego.
San
Yeah.
Diego.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I was actually able to visit one of their first locations last year when I was out there in California, and love the concept that they have going on. It's a creative space, right? So they have, I think, 30 different people that are all either artists, or they're chefs, or they're kind of in this or musicians, and they're all creators living in the same household. So I think when you have that interest based, creating that sense of community is almost a home run, like right off the bat, right? It's just everyone kind of gets along, and they all come from at least some kind of shared value. When we're looking at some of the bigger players, whether it's Common, Star City, Ollie, here in the U.S., they're less interest based, more we have a huge building, whoever wants to come live here can. And so I think when you look at those kind of larger accommodations, it's a bit more difficult just by the nature of numbers to create that really really good community feel. And I haven't, I guess, like over the past year, lived at one of those kind of bigger players, so I haven't exactly experienced the community there. But kind of looking at their websites and Instagram pages, and like chatting with some people that have lived there, it definitely seems like what they're creating is certainly at least one step above the kind of traditional, like urban apartment, right? So I think we're yet to see, who has really nailed and who's really going to come out as kind of the Apple brand of co-living. But I think it's going to be, one of these big players that over the next 3 or 4 years, after iterating and finding out what community models work best, are really able to nail that and then copy and paste it to all of their properties across the country or the world.
Great points. And no, you're right. I love that you segmented it, right? So you're like, the smaller co-living homes operators, can have those themes and can really, like ours, six CEOs living together, six entrepreneurs, and maybe that's why it works so well. I mean, we just planned this. We're actually renting a big RV. We're going to go all the way up the California
Oh wow.
coast. Yeah, to a few national parks and Napa Valley, and the six of us and our puppies. So it's like we get along that great that we're so excited to take this trip. And just love hanging out with each other. And typically everybody's traveling. Not everybody was home at the same time. It was super, super rare. So yeah, it's just that community. And even my friends living alone right now, they're struggling. They're having a hard time because it's really super isolating. So do you feel like, these times in a pandemic that it's actually going to push even more people into co-living, you think?
100%. So one of the articles, I think it was maybe like last month that I put it out there, was called "Co-Living: An Ideal Living Solution During a Pandemic," which on the surface I think doesn't make sense at all. I tell a lot of my friends that are asking, "Oh, is co-living over?" And it makes sense on the surface, kind of, if you have any business right now, whose main pillar is to bring people together, and have more face-to-face interactions, it would make sense that, oh, maybe that's not gonna continue into the future with this whole social distancing thing. But I think what we've seen, once you dig a bit below the surface, you find out that the pillars of co-living are only going to become stronger after the pandemic. So you look at housing affordability, right? Obviously, with the economic downturn across the entire world, coming out of this, people have lost their job or furloughed. They're going to be looking for more affordable living options, right? So co-living with a higher density is a lot of times able to offer a lower price point, when you take into account the all-inclusive nature, than a lot of other kind of urban living environments. And then as well, you look at one of the other pillars, which is community, right? Social interaction. I think over the past 4 or 5 months, everyone has recognized, wow, humans are very social creatures, and we really need that face-to-face interaction, and just hanging out with other people on a regular basis. And so I think once we kind of come out of this, everyone will be seeking out, kind of ways that we can live communally and share spaces. And so I think, and kind of seeing the resiliency of the co-living space across the world, a lot of operators, kind of coming out and saying, look, our retention rates are actually doing better than the traditional multifamily urban living environments. And so I think that, kind of counterintuitively, there are some things that, coming out of the pandemic, I think co-living is going to emerge actually much stronger than it came in, and we'll start to see that kind of hockey stick growth here pretty soon.
And do you feel like, and I think I already know the answer to this, but do you feel like the urban living, right, the dense cities, that co-living is the most popular in, or do you think the rural areas are going to grow more in co-living?
Yeah, so that's something that I think is a fascinating question as well. It's been certainly been a hot topic as far as different calls that I've been on and conferences. I think it'll be interesting. I think, maybe in the short term, you might see more people saying, okay, if I can work from home now, why would I pay X amount of money to be in a city? Or, in 5, 6 years, let's say once all this is gone completely, and companies kind of realize, okay, maybe you come into the office, 2 hours a week, or two days a week rather. So then your commute, even if you live outside of Manhattan or you live outside of LA or San Francisco or DC, that commute you're only doing 2 days a week, right? Having said that, I've read a few books kind of on like urbanization. One of them is Triumph of the City, and I think it really paints an amazing picture of why cities are the kind of pinnacle of human civilization. And so you look at urbanization, and recently, the majority of the people are living in cities for the first time in human history. The UN has put out reports that that's only going to increase over the next until at least 2030, right? And so this urbanization trend, I think this pandemic, maybe it'll kind of decrease it a little bit in the short term, but I think the advantages of living in an urban environment, the entertainment, the creativity, the innovation that can come out of people living in close quarters and kind of rubbing elbows and exchanging ideas. I think that's for sure going to win out in the end, and people will still want to live in these urban environments. Having said that, I think rural co-living, this is a golden opportunity, I think, as far as saying, there are a lot of folks that want co-living, and not all of them want to live in the downtown of a major metro area, right? And so I think there will be an opportunity for both urban and rural. Having said that, I think urban co-living will continue to be the norm moving forward.
Oh, see, that was the answer I figured. And it was very eloquently said. So thank you so much. And I wrote that book down, Triumph of the City. I haven't heard of that. Cool. That's
Yes, great book.
awesome. I'm gonna check it out. So yeah, you're right. Single people are not going to live in like a rural area. Where's the restaurants and the nightlife and the social activities?
Yeah.
Young professionals need that. Again, and I think they kind of fled New York City and San Francisco and kind of needed that break and that recharge. But I have already heard from some of them, and they're kind of going crazy. They're like, I want to go back to the city. I miss the energy. So you are exactly right with all those points. And in the future, hopefully it's not 5 to 6 years out of when is back to normal going to be? Nobody knows.
Hopefully
Yeah,
soon.
hopefully soon, but we all know it's not going to be in 2020 anymore. I love that we're like, oh, we could travel, maybe later in 2020. I don't think so anymore, unfortunately, but we're all making the best of it. So that's cool. So the other, let me see kind of backing up to earlier in the conversation, the models where because I just want to make this point because I just found this out recently myself. And I'd thought about it. There's some of those big players that were doing that model of like, okay, a bunch of apartments spread out in a big city, vacant apartments, couldn't build community really at all. Just kind of giving a roof over somebody's head. And about 4 of them have gone out of business already very quickly. Some big guys that raised a lot of money. And I was like, well, that's interesting because Sonder raised another round. They're doing really well. And so I talked with one of their team members and they were like, well, and I'm like, wow, how are they doing so well still? And everybody else struggled or got, disappeared. And he goes, because Sonder was smart and took entire buildings over. So, which is brilliant. And I was like, oh, okay, that's what's going on. Because imagine your leverage with the landlord to say, hey, we're really struggling. Our residents aren't paying rent, or we've had a decrease in occupancy. We need a hand. We can't pay rent. We need a discounted, to that main landlord of that whole building, because the landlord's kind of doesn't want an empty building all at once during a pandemic. Okay, otherwise we're going to leave the whole building, and now
Right.
how are you going to fill this building in the middle of San Francisco? All these vacancies. Have you heard or seen anything similar?
So I guess kind of my main thought on that is kind of hearing what you just mentioned. The kind of foundational issue that I think it comes back to is that humans really enjoy sharing the same space and time. If you're really spread out all over a city, instead of like it sounds what Sonder kind of shifted to was kind of looking at having that kind of one centralized building. I think being spread out, even though we have amazing communication technology, I mean it's the best in human history, right? And it's only getting better. There really is no replacing face-to-face human interactions, kind of being in that same environment at once, right? So when you are kind of all spread out, it would make sense to me that during a downturn like this, part of the thing that would have people stay would be that community, right? Especially during something like this where you don't get to see people nearly as much as you did before, right? So the kind of models moving forward, what it sounds like is kind of having that centralized location, even during an economic downturn, the kind of pillar of community can kind of get you through this difficult time, right? So haven't heard, I guess, any specifics about kind of looking at decentralized models moving forward. But I think the example that you just brought up kind of certainly makes sense to me as far as bringing people together in the exact same space or having it all spread out. Having that centralized idea, I think, is for sure the move.
Cool. And then I know, and on your blog and on your website, you talk about facilitating human connection. And I hate that they're calling it social distancing, to be honest, because it's technically physical distancing.
Physical, yes, yes.
And like, I keep catching myself, and I've been really good about, not even using the word social distancing because it has to be physical distancing. And that's disconnecting people even more in our world. And there's loneliness epidemics. So it's not, on that side of things, not good at all. So I would love for you to elaborate on your thoughts about that. Is how do you facilitate human connection during a pandemic?
Sure, sure. Yeah, this is another thing that on a bunch of the Co-Liv calls that has been brought up, and there's some people out there that are doing some really really cool creative things to kind of keep people together. One example that I'll share is Ven Co-Living. Their community manager Sydney actually spoke on one of the Co-Liv calls, and she brought up something that they had done, and it was really really cool. So what their community facilitation program did is they went and they got out all of these ingredients for a pizza night. So they didn't order pizzas. They went and got pizza dough and cheese and all the things necessary. They went to grocery shopping, then they dropped it off at each of the Venn locations, right? Then during that night, they had all of the different locations, all the different apartments, get on a collective Zoom call and cook pizza together. So it's not just, oh, we'll get Domino's or whatever. It's I assume how the call meant was, oh, do you guys have a rolling pin? No. All right. Well, what are you going to use to roll the dough out or whatever, right? So it's kind of being able to kind of combine physical and digital kind of interactions, right? So within one of those Venn units, you have 4 or 5 people that are all kind of physically together, but then as well you have your larger community that digitally is able to spend that time together, right? So even being physically distanced, I think a lot of these co-living operators have found a way to keep people socially still together, just like you mentioned. So I think it's kind of been cool in a way in that it's forced co-living operators to think creatively about not only creating community physically, but also how can we bring people together and have community even if they're spread across the world. So I think moving forward, experimenting with a lot of these kind of digital and physical experiences will actually help a lot of these operators as they open up different locations in different cities to kind of have one collective community under that brand. So that was one example for Van. I'm sure you've heard of a bunch of other ones, but it's been cool to kind of see how community facilitation has changed through these difficult times.
That's really cool. No, Connor, that needs to be your next blog or article. Is just you should compile, and I've been meaning to do this, I haven't had time, but compiling all these incredible creative ideas on how to still keep that community, even in a virtual setting, like that pizza. That's such a cool idea. I know.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah, I want to do. A few of us love to grill really good steaks. So just a couple days
Mm.
ago, I'm like, because one of the housemates grilled some up last night, and I'm like, oh, it'd be cool if like we each grill a steak and we do like a blind taste test and we see whose
Oh,
steak is the best.
little Iron Chef, right?
Iron Chef, but yeah, taste testing, and the other housemates have to like vote on them. Again, we're getting really creative here, 5 months in, right? Like, what else can we do?
You
Um,
got to do it.
and highly recommend anybody listening, watching the Michael Jordan documentary that's out right now. They moved, yeah. So now as a home, we're watching that every few evenings, and kind of bonding over that. So that's kind of cool. So yeah, you again, it's been fun, I think, and it's slowed things down enough for people to really take time and think about what really matters in that sense. The other, let's talk about your articles. What are some, I've know you already written a few, and thank you for talking about, plugging Kndrd and myself. What are some ones that, you've gotten great feedback from, specific articles that you enjoyed writing? And then what are some future ones you have on the horizon?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the ones that I have on the horizon, it's actually going to go live next week. So pretty excited about it. Is looking at spatial design in co-living, right? So it's looking at how can we design a physical space, a physical building, a physical neighborhood, right? In order to maximize human well-being. And it's a topic that I had never really thought about almost at all until I started hearing a lot of these, kind of spatial design experts chat about, oh, here's how we're creating this co-living space and using design to facilitate more face-to-face interaction. One of those is David from Co-House, who I know you're a great friend with as well. But he has designed some amazing homes out there in LA. There's a few other ones. Tom Manuel, he does a well studio out of London, and he's also one of the founders of Conscious Co-Living. And so a lot of his models is kind of looking at how can we use kind of curved design, right? So probably almost all of the design that you see in the world is square, it's rectangular, right? But his whole idea is that human beings, we actually like curved lines and curved buildings. They're actually more pleasant. They're more aesthetically pleasing to us. And so I think kind of thinking about how can we incorporate a lot of these spatial design elements, and then as well looking at how can we have more greenery inside, how can we have more fresh air, how can we kind of blend indoor and outdoor spaces in order to, with that goal in mind of having kind of well-being and human connection at the center of how we design our spaces. And so yeah, certainly be looking out for that article. I'm certainly not an expert in it, but I was able to talk with some experts and kind of put together an article of all of their ideas. And I'm certainly excited to see where the industry is going as far as spatial design in the next 5 to 10 years, because I think there's really going to be some cool, innovative models that will come out of that.
And then I know you were looking, and you're going to get snatched right up right after we put this on a podcast and a YouTube show. But I would love to hear. I know you're looking for that perfect concept to help either launch, grow, put systems in place. Obviously, you have an incredible background. So you are looking for that perfect role somewhere in the world. I don't know where in the world. Does it have to be remote? Maybe for now it has to be remote. But what would be like your dream position in this industry for anybody listening and wants to grab you?
Sure. Yeah, so I think looking at kind of my background, one like public policy during undergrad and then business school, and then as well kind of looking at this kind of co-living researcher background, and my real personal love for bringing people together and facilitating communities. I think the kind of holistic co-living view, or some kind of holistic co-living role would be awesome. So kind of looking at strategy and operations and growth, or kind of like a launch position, right? So kind of looking at, okay, we want to open up a new location in Los Angeles or Singapore or wherever. We're 6 months out. We need to put these processes in place. We need to really get our kind of sales and marketing team going. And then, okay, we've hit opening day, and now we have 4 months to lease up or whatever that looks like. And so I think kind of that kind of creation process and that launch process, I really think will be able to teach you so much about all of the things that are kind of behind the co-living curtain, right? So what does it take to run a real estate business? What does it take to operate a co-living facility on a day-to-day basis. Those are the kinds of things that I think, looking at my business background and kind of that I've worked at in some startups before, I think I kind of thrive in that kind of dynamic, fast moving environment. And for me, it's something that I would learn, I think, the maximum amount in that kind of short amount of time. Sure, it'll be fast moving and stressful, I'm sure, at times. But I think kind of wearing that kind of jack of all trades hat, I think would be an awesome role for me.
And would it be like in the States, or like where's your dream location? Anywhere in the world? Because you've traveled a lot.
Yes, yes. So I think kind of more or less anywhere at the moment. I think obviously looking at a lot of the travel restrictions and everything else, kind of leaving Southeast Asia and coming back here, I was kind of thinking, okay, well, maybe I'll be working over in Singapore. There's a lot going on in Europe. There's a ton here in the US. I think, potentially in the short term, maybe looking here in the US, just because of some of the visa restrictions and travel and all of that kind of stuff. But having said that, if there's a role in Asia or Australia or Europe or really, really anywhere. I just really like the idea of, coming into a new environment, learning as much as I possibly can about co-living and really empowering the like kind of global movement to positively affect the lives of as many people as possible. So sort of location agnostic at the moment. I think it would sort of make sense to potentially be here in the US just because of everything going on. But 6-12 months out, however long it's going to take to get on the other side of this, I'll live anywhere, I feel like.
Awesome. And then, okay, so again, you've got this experience of living on these different continents and researching, around the world co-living. I would love to hear your kind of the differences between US, Europe, Asia, Australia when it comes to co-living right now as you see it.
Yeah, yeah, and that's funny you mentioned that. So I'm actually writing another article right now for Co-Liv that is it's a recap of the Urban Developer conference that was actually hosted out of Australia.
Yes, I was on. I listened
Um,
to part of it. It was so good. I was on it. Yeah, that was amazing.
yes, the Urban Developer did an amazing job hosting that. I think it was probably the best kind of virtual conference that I've been a part of. And speaking of that, certainly excited for the Co-Living Hub
Yes.
conference coming up in September. I just registered.
Yay.
Should be an awesome few days of co-living.
Yes.
Yes. Um, but yeah, and so they actually had some kind of some big real estate experts from all over the world, some from the U.S., Europe, Asia, Australia, and so it really is kind of developing differently in all of these markets, right? So I think in the U.S. it's really starting to take off as a as its own asset class, and we have tens of thousands of beds already in operation, and there's even more in the pipeline over the next 2 years. And then looking at Europe, there's certainly a lot of kind of bigger players that are taking off. In Australia, I think part of what we learned from the call was that a lot of their market is based off of kind of very very mobile people, right? So folks that might be moving into Australia. Obviously, right now with all the travel restrictions, over the next 6 to 12 months, however long it is, it might not be absolutely exploding, but once kind of everything opens back up, Australia seems very very confident as far as the build to rent and the co-living markets really taking off there. And I think looking at the high real estate prices in Sydney and Melbourne and other cities across Asia and Australia, I think co-living is going to make a lot of sense there, just because wage growth and kind of property prices are so out of whack as far as how they've developed over the past 20 years. And so I think that's where co-living really, really can start to make a lot of sense. And then in Asia, yeah, so right now, obviously China's doing their own thing, India's doing their own thing. Their operators, the scale is just mind-boggling. With over a billion people living in each of those countries, you can be an operator and have 10,000 beds. I feel like almost overnight. But then kind of looking at Singapore and Hong Kong, kind of being the other kind of places in kind of Southeast and Eastern Asia that are really starting to take off. But then again, Malaysia's starting to see some players. Vietnam, Indonesia certainly as well. There's obviously a lot of digital nomad stuff going on in Bali and then in Chiang Mai in Thailand. So it's really exciting kind of seeing how these different areas of the world are developing co-living in a different way. But really the idea is, and this is kind of the like bigger picture for co-living, it's just saying this living solution is ideal for people in these different parts of the world, and it doesn't exist yet. For me, co-living, that's kind of what co-living is saying there's a living solution and there's demand for this. It doesn't exist. Someone's going to go out there and create it. And so I think it's kind of all being lumped into co-living at the moment. But really, there's just people all over the world that are developing new ways to live in the 21st century. And I think, kind of as we move forward over the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be more testing, more iteration, more refining exactly what people want. And then it's really going to become a mainstream, kind of way to live in the future.
Love that. And I know, and on that conference, Susan from Cushman Wakefield, her like,
Yes,
did you, oh my gosh, like
she's amazing.
all
Yeah,
the data she had just off the top of her head, she had so many, numbers, mostly US based, which is great. Some of those stats I didn't even know yet, because again,
right.
it's evolving so quickly, this industry, and there's so much future pipeline, and that keeps changing, and new concepts breaking ground, even in midst of COVID right now. It's end of July, almost August, and when we're recording this, and they, it's people are starting to break ground with new concepts. Like, that's not scaring them. If anything, it's motivating them, because they know, again, a few years out, how things are going to shift in these big cities. But no, her talk was incredible. Like, I emailed her right after. I'm like, oh my gosh, that was such, like, I just loved her content, the stats, her background. She's very knowledgeable in capital markets. So that's cool. No, I didn't know you were on there too. That's great. So let's see here. Oh, and then when you were talking about Thailand, did you live in Chiang Mai at all, or visit Chiang Mai?
Yeah, so I did visit there while I think it was the first semester of my MBA. They have a lantern lighting festival over there. It was around Thanksgiving time, and we got to go there for that, which was amazing. We went to a elephant sanctuary, which was very very good time. So yeah, Chiang Mai and Bali really seem to be the two kind of spots. I mean, like obviously for good reason. They're amazing locations, a lot going on. But as far as digital nomads that are kind of traveling around Asia and traveling around Southeast Asia specifically, those are really, really hot spots where a kind of different version of co-living, definitely still co-living, but a different kind of digital nomad version has really popped up and really thrived thus far.
Yeah, no, no, no. Chiang Mai, it's so funny. Chiang Mai is one of my favorite
Great spot.
cities in the world. Dubai and Chiang Mai, which are the totally complete opposite. But I think I love both for different reasons. So yeah, no, that's, and watching the elephants paint those paintings, just like
Really
no,
cool.
it's so cool.
Amazing animals.
They're so sweet. Awesome. Okay, cool. I think, let me think. I thought I had one other last question. And again, thanks so much for coming on, and just your passion shines through when it comes to co-living, and I love seeing that in others. Though, here we go. The most important question, the last question I ask everybody is, Connor, where do you see co-living in the year 2030? So 10 years out.
Ooh, great question. Yeah, so I think I'm extremely excited. I think about where co-living is going to be in 10 years. I think one of the biggest things that I've recently been hearing, as far as when I was looking at some of these spatial design models, you kind of look at them and you say, wow, these could really do a great job of facilitating human connection. But why aren't they being built? And I think one of the biggest reasons is because of kind of investors still are a bit risk adverse, is as far as jumping fully into co-living. So right now, a lot of the kind of design models are fairly similar to traditional multifamily because